The music thumped like a heartbeat through the sprawling suburban mansion, bass vibrating the polished wooden floors and making the crystal chandeliers tremble with each pulse. Laughter, conversation, and the clinking of glasses melded into a chaotic symphony. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, friends letting loose after a long week, everyone dressed in their finest, and the air heavy with perfume and cologne. Emma Harper moved through the crowd with effortless charm, her golden hair catching the light as she laughed at a joke she wasn't even sure she heard. She had a way of drawing people in without trying, a smile that made strangers feel like old friends. But tonight, there was a tension in her movements, a subtle flicker behind her eyes that nobody noticed or chose to ignore. She had arrived early, greeting her host Samantha with warmth, hugging familiar faces and exchanging pleasantries. But as the night wore on, Emma's smiles began to feel strained, her laughter slightly delayed, like she was performing a role she no longer wanted to play. She sipped her wine quietly, glancing at her phone more than she let on, scrolling through messages from an unknown number that left her fingers trembling slightly. At the peak of the party, a heated argument erupted near the kitchen. Two of Samantha's friends, a man and a woman, shouted over spilled drinks and broken glass, their voices cutting through the music. Emma stepped back instinctively, eyes darting to the exit for just a second, just long enough to catch the attention of a shadowed figure standing near the balcony. He was tall, hoodie pulled low over his face, silent yet impossibly present. She felt her pulse quicken, an instinctive dread crawling up her spine. She told herself it was nothing. Parties were chaotic, strangers came and went, yet the feeling clung. Around midnight, Emma suddenly announced she was stepping out for a breath of fresh air. She didn't say goodbye, she didn't explain. Some friends waved, distracted by their own conversations, while others barely noticed. Emma slipped through the crowd, down the dimly lit hallway, and out into the cool night. Minutes turned into hours, and when she didn't return, whispers started to ripple through the party. Someone called her name, others shrugged, assuming she had left for home. By morning, the unease had turned into panic. Emma's roommate, Lily, returned home to find the apartment door unlocked, lights dimmed, and Emma nowhere to be found. Her purse sat on the kitchen counter, phone left behind, a half-finished cup of tea on the table. The sight was unnerving, an unspoken message hanging in the still air. Lily called Emma repeatedly, no answer. She called friends, checked social media, nothing. Detective Alex Monroe arrived at the scene within the hour. He had been in the force long enough to know the signs, long enough to sense when a disappearance wasn't just a teenage rebellion or an adult taking an unannounced walk. The scene spoke volumes in silence. An unlocked apartment, personal belongings left intact, no signs of forced entry. Whoever had taken Emma had planned this meticulously, or she had left voluntarily, leaving clues behind. Monroe interviewed the party guests first. Many were groggy, hungover, or too caught up in their own stories to recall much. One detail, however, stood out. A few witnesses remembered seeing Emma speak with a man in a hoodie, the same figure she had glanced at before leaving. His face was obscured, his presence fleeting, but the memory was sharp enough to leave a chill. Her phone revealed more mysteries. 10 unread messages from an unknown number stared back at Monroe, each one more unsettling than the last. Some were innocuous. "Are you okay?" Others were stranger, almost cryptic. "I see everything. Don't go where you shouldn't." Monroe frowned, recognizing the tone of someone obsessed, someone who had been following Emma carefully. The first clue emerged from the party grounds, a small piece of torn fabric snagged on a fence post near the back gate. It was delicate, pale blue, unmistakably from Emma's dress, but there was no sign of a struggle nearby, no footprints, no other items, as if she had been plucked from the night itself, leaving only this shred as a silent testimony. By late morning, Monroe had pieced together the first thread of the mystery. Emma Harper had vanished from a lively party without warning, without explanation, leaving behind a trail that was simultaneously obvious and maddeningly vague. Something or someone had orchestrated her disappearance with precision. He returned to the apartment to examine the voicemail left on Emma's phone. It was muffled, reversed, the words warped and distorted. "He's watching. Find me." Monroe replayed it again, slower this time, trying to decipher the hidden urgency. It sent a shiver down his spine. Whoever was behind this wasn't just following her, they were aware of every move she made. Monroe's instincts told him that the night had hidden more than just one missing woman. It had concealed secrets, grudges, and obsessions lurking beneath the surface of the town's suburban calm. Emma Harper wasn't the first to vanish quietly, and if he didn't act fast, she might not be the last. As he stepped outside, he noticed a shadow flicker across the neighboring yard. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but in that moment, Monroe felt the weight of eyes on him, watching, analyzing. The game had begun, and the first pieces were already moving on a chessboard he didn't fully understand yet. The story wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. Detective Alex Monroe leaned back in his chair, staring at the cluttered map of the town pinned to his wall. Pins, strings, and photographs of Emma Harper littered its surface, each one a fragment of a puzzle that refused to fit together neatly. The torn fabric from the party, the mysterious voicemail, and the cryptic messages from an unknown number were just the beginning. Every lead seemed promising, only to dissolve into frustration. Monroe knew the first 48 hours were critical. Time was slipping, and with every hour, Emma could be moved farther from the trail, deeper into danger. He called in his team and divided the investigation into 3 angles: her acquaintances, digital footprints, and potential sightings. The first interviews were a tangled mess of half-truths and forgotten details. Emma's ex-boyfriend, Tyler, was defensive and jittery, insisting he hadn't seen her in days. His eyes flicked nervously to the detectives whenever her name came up, but he produced a credible alibi for the night of the party. Still, Monroe noted the lingering resentment in his posture, the way his jaw tightened when Emma's career achievements were mentioned. Tyler was a red herring, perhaps, but a convincing one. Then there was Rachel, a co-worker who had openly envied Emma's recent promotion at the marketing firm. Rachel's alibi was weak. She claimed to have stayed home alone, watching television. Her demeanor was calm, almost too calm, a practiced mask hiding something beneath the surface. Monroe filed her away as another potential lead, though nothing concrete linked her to Emma's disappearance yet. The unknown figure who had sent the mysterious messages remained the most unnerving. Monroe traced the number to a prepaid phone purchased anonymously, leaving almost no trail. Whoever it was, they were careful, deliberate, and unnervingly patient. Then came the CCTV footage from a nearby gas station located about 10 miles from the party. The grainy video showed Emma stepping from a car with a hooded man. Her movements were tense, anxious, and hesitant, as if she had been coerced. Monroe paused the frame repeatedly, enhancing shadows, searching for a glimpse of the man's face. Nothing definitive appeared. The stranger had anticipated every potential exposure, every camera, every witness. The trail led to a wooded area outside the town limits where Emma's smartwatch had pinged sporadically. The heart rate data was alarming. Spikes of fear, rapid movement, and long periods of inactivity suggested both panic and confinement. Monroe followed the data, driving slowly along narrow dirt roads until he reached the edge of the forest. It was there, among the twisted trees and underbrush, that the first major clue appeared: a small backpack, unmistakably Emma's, partially hidden beneath a fallen log. Inside were personal items, a notebook, her wallet, and a single hairpin. Most importantly was a half-burnt note: "Don't trust anyone, they're everywhere." Monroe felt a chill. The message wasn't random, it was intended for someone specific, someone who could help her if they understood the code. But it was also a warning. Emma was aware she was being watched, aware that the people closest to her might not be who they seemed. Back at the station, Monroe assembled the pieces on a large whiteboard. The party, the torn fabric, the smartwatch pings, the mysterious messages, and the half-burnt note. It was a tangled web, and every new clue threatened to entangle them further. He decided to take a more aggressive approach. He re-interviewed the party guests, focusing on the night itself. Subtle inconsistencies emerged. One guest remembered Emma leaving with a man, but another swore she had gone alone. A bartender mentioned seeing a pale-faced woman lurking near the gate, watching Emma closely. No one could agree on the man's appearance, height, or clothing. Whoever had taken Emma was careful to be seen without being seen. Then came the breakthrough, a lead that was both exciting and terrifying. One of the witnesses recalled a cabin, abandoned and overgrown, at the far edge of town. The description was vague, but it matched the location where Emma's smartwatch had last pinged. Monroe and a small team headed there at night, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The cabin was dilapidated, walls warped with age, windows broken, and doors hanging on rusted hinges. Inside, dust coated every surface. Nothing moved, nothing stirred, yet the air was heavy, as if the structure itself held its breath. Monroe's flashlight flicked across the floor, landing on a single chilling detail, a piece of fabric, torn, faded, and unmistakably from Emma's dress. A thrill and a sinking feeling struck Monroe simultaneously. Emma had been here, or someone wanted them to believe she had. It was too clean, too deliberate, like a trap designed to mislead. Every instinct in Monroe screamed caution. Whoever was behind this was playing a game, leaving just enough clues to draw the hunters closer. The night deepened, shadows stretching across the walls. Monroe's team scoured the cabin but found nothing else. No signs of struggle, no fingerprints, nothing that indicated Emma's immediate presence. Yet Monroe could feel it. She had been here, and whoever moved her next had done so with precision. Driving back to the station, Monroe replayed the details in his mind. Each clue, the torn fabric, the smartwatch, the burnt note, and the CCTV, was a breadcrumb leading them somewhere, but each one also pointed to a mind meticulous, calculating, and dangerously obsessed. This wasn't random, this was personal. By the next morning, the investigation had grown in intensity. The community was abuzz, rumors spreading like wildfire. Social media posts speculated wildly about Emma's fate. Friends and neighbors were interviewed again, each time with more suspicion, more tension, more fear. Monroe's intuition was sharp. The key to finding Emma wasn't just following the physical clues, it was understanding the person who had taken her, the mind behind the meticulous trail. Whoever had orchestrated this knew her routines, her habits, and the patterns of those around her. It wasn't just a disappearance, it was a calculated orchestration of fear, control, and anticipation. The detective paused, rubbing his temples, staring at the map once again. The pins, strings, and photographs mocked him with their complexity, but he knew this: Emma Harper was alive. She had left traces for someone to follow, and he would follow them, piece by piece, clue by clue, until he uncovered the truth. As he left the station, Monroe felt the familiar weight of unseen eyes. In the darkness of an alleyway, across the street, a figure watched him, silent, still, and patient. The game had escalated, the hunter had become the hunted, and the next move would decide everything. Detective Alex Monroe sat in his car at the edge of the overgrown lot, staring at the decaying warehouse that had been flagged by a confidential tip. The structure loomed in the darkness, its broken windows like black eyes staring back at him. Months of investigation, dead ends, and carefully planted clues had led him here. Somewhere inside that shadowed skeleton of wood and steel,
Emma Harper was alive, or she had been until recently. The warehouse smelled of mildew and rust. The wind whispered through jagged holes in the walls, carrying an echo of silence so heavy it pressed against Monroe's chest. He motioned to his team to fan out, flashlights sweeping the corners. Every step felt deliberate, as if the floorboards themselves might betray a misstep. Monroe had been piecing together a chilling pattern. Emma's disappearance was not the act of a random predator. It was calculated, obsessive, and deeply personal. The clues she left behind, the torn fabric, the smartwatch pings, the half-burned note, were not just breadcrumbs. They were signals, deliberately designed to lead someone who knew how to read them, someone like Monroe. He knelt, examining scratches on the floor near the main entrance. At first they looked random, but closer inspection revealed a pattern, letters, faint but intentional. Someone had tried to spell a message left for anyone perceptive enough to notice. Monroe's pulse quickened. Emma had been here. She had been alert, resourceful, and desperately trying to communicate. Moving deeper into the warehouse, Monroe noticed small signs of recent occupancy, footprints in the dust, a partially open crate, and remnants of food carefully hidden behind stacked boxes. Someone had been meticulous in keeping their presence invisible, yet controlled the environment down to the smallest detail. Then he heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible sound like a muffled whimper coming from the far corner. He froze, signaling his team to hold. The sound repeated, slightly louder, followed by a faint tapping, almost rhythmic. Monroe's heart raced. It was a human signal, intentional, directed, alive. He approached cautiously, flashlight beams slicing through the darkness. Behind a false wall, partially concealed by plywood and debris, was a narrow door. The hinges creaked faintly when he tested them. Monroe exchanged a tense look with his partner, Sergeant Delaney. This had to be it. Whoever had orchestrated this had designed a hidden prison, soundproofed and nearly impossible to detect. The door was locked, but not securely. Monroe's experience told him the lock was more for show than protection. He forced it open with deliberate pressure. Inside, the space was cramped, dimly lit by a single flickering lamp. The air smelled of dust and confinement, and there, huddled in the corner, was Emma Harper. Her eyes widened at the sight of Monroe. Fear, relief, and disbelief mingled in her gaze. Her clothes were torn, her hair disheveled, and her hands were scratched and bruised. Yet despite everything, she had left subtle clues inside the room, marks on the walls forming letters, objects arranged in a code, and an old smartwatch with its GPS set to ping intermittently. Every detail had been a desperate attempt to communicate with the outside world. Monroe knelt beside her. "Emma, you're safe now. You're safe." His voice was calm, authoritative, but beneath it ran the tension of months spent tracing her steps. I tried," she stammered, voice trembling. "I left signs for someone to find me. I knew he was watching. I had to leave breadcrumbs." Monroe's team swept the rest of the warehouse while he helped Emma to her feet. They found additional signs of obsession, walls covered with sketches of her routines, photographs taken secretly, and meticulous logs of her movements over the past months. Whoever had done this had studied her life with the precision of a predator, but also with a dangerous, almost delusional obsession. The breakthrough came when Monroe traced the clues to a man named Evan Cross, a neighbor Emma had casually known. His name had surfaced in the investigation of the prepaid phone, the messages, and one of Emma's cryptic journal entries. Evan was unassuming in appearance, blending easily into suburban life, but his history revealed prior stalking incidents and an obsession with control. Monroe realized that Evan had been orchestrating every step, from the party to the cabin, the abandoned lot, and finally to this hidden warehouse. Each move had been carefully planned to mislead the authorities while maintaining control over Emma. Emma's bravery was evident in the evidence she left behind. She had used the environment itself as a communication tool, leaving small signs that only someone attentive would notice. Her scratches on the wall spelled out fragments of her location. A misplaced bottle formed an arrow pointing to the hidden entrance. The flickering lamp had been rigged to draw attention to a specific corner where her phone could transmit GPS signals. But the danger was far from over. Monroe knew that Evan was still in the building, watching their approach, ready to react. The tension became palpable. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow cast by the flashlights could signal his presence. Monroe signaled a careful, synchronized approach. One wrong move, and Evan could harm Emma, or worse, vanish again into the shadows, leaving them empty-handed. Suddenly, a movement caught Monroe's eye. A figure darted past a broken window, trying to escape. Monroe and his team gave chase, the warehouse echoing with the sound of footsteps and shouted orders. Boxes toppled, dust flew, and the darkness became a tactical battlefield. Evan stumbled, caught in a corner, desperation flashing in his eyes. Monroe moved in, calm but commanding. "It's over, Evan. Step away." His hands shook, eyes darting around the room, realizing his meticulously planned control was crumbling. Emma watched, fear and relief battling across her face as Evan was restrained. The ordeal, months in the making, was coming to a climax. Every clue she had left, every subtle signal, every breadcrumb had guided Monroe to this moment. Her intelligence and courage had been as crucial as the detective's perseverance. As they led her out of the warehouse, Monroe noticed the walls, the objects, the marks, and realized the depth of Evan's obsession. He had studied Emma's life in almost terrifying detail, anticipating every reaction, every attempt to leave signs. Yet Emma had been smarter, more observant, and more courageous than he anticipated. She had survived not just with hope, but with calculated strategy. Outside, the air felt sharp and clean, a contrast to the suffocating darkness of the warehouse. Emma breathed deeply, eyes wide, processing the reality of freedom. Monroe remained vigilant, knowing the danger might not be fully over. Someone like Evan often had accomplices, patterns, or methods yet to be revealed. As the ambulance arrived to check on Emma, Monroe allowed himself a brief moment of relief. The immediate threat was neutralized, but in the back of his mind, he knew the case had more layers, more shadows to uncover. The clues Emma had left were vital. They were not just signs of survival, but a testament to a mind fighting to communicate under extreme duress. And somewhere in the dark corners of the city, Monroe suspected that the game was far from over. The warehouse loomed in the early morning light, an unassuming shell of rusted steel and broken windows. To anyone else, it was abandoned, just another relic of decay. But Detective Alex Monroe knew better. Inside, the remnants of obsession lingered, walls marked with desperate scratches, scattered photographs, and traces of Emma Harper's struggle to survive. The danger had been neutralized for now, but the case was far from over. Emma sat in the back of the patrol car, shivering but alert. Her eyes scanned the warehouse from the corner of the window, recalling each shadow, each crate, each desperate clue she had left behind. Every small act she had performed, misplaced objects, marks on the walls, the pinging smartwatch, had been a calculated signal for someone to find her. Monroe had followed those breadcrumbs with the precision of a hunter, but Emma's bravery and ingenuity had guided him every step of the way. "Are you okay?" Monroe asked, his voice calm but edged with concern. Emma hesitated, then nodded. I think so. He watched everything I did, every move, every thought almost. But I kept trying to make sure someone would see, someone would come." Monroe's jaw tightened.
The scope of Evan Cross's obsession was staggering. A man who could track and manipulate every aspect of someone's life without leaving obvious signs was dangerous, unpredictable. And yet, Emma's courage had turned the tables. Inside the warehouse, Sergeant Delaney and the rest of Monroe's team conducted a meticulous sweep. Every corner, every hidden compartment, every crack in the walls was examined. Dust swirled in the weak morning sunlight, filtering through broken panes. And then, behind a stack of crates, they found Evan, slumped in a dark corner, his face pale, eyes wide with panic. He had tried to escape, but his calculated control had unraveled. Monroe approached slowly, every step deliberate. "It's over, Evan. There's nowhere left to go." The man's eyes darted, frantic. She'll never tell." His words trailed off into muttered threats, meaningless in the face of the law. Monroe handcuffed him, reading the fear and confusion in his eyes. Months of meticulous planning, manipulation, and terror had culminated in a moment of absolute collapse. Emma watched, barely breathing, her body tense. She had feared this day might never come, that the shadows she had endured would never lift. But now, with Evan restrained, the sense of danger began to ebb, replaced with a cautious relief. The team gathered her belongings, the notebook, smartwatch, and small personal effects she had managed to keep hidden. Each item was a testament to her survival, a record of her courage and intelligence under unimaginable stress. The torn fabric, the scratched messages on the walls, the carefully placed objects, all became part of the evidence, pieces of a puzzle that told the story of her resilience. Monroe guided her outside. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew and freedom. Emma breathed deeply, a small but meaningful victory against the months of fear she had endured. For a moment, the world felt safe again. But even in relief, Monroe knew the aftermath would be complicated. The town would be shaken when news of Evan's obsession and crime spread. Emma's friends and neighbors, people who thought they knew her life, would struggle with the unsettling realization of how little they had actually understood. In the following days, the investigation continued. Monroe and his team interviewed friends, co-workers, and acquaintances, piecing together a full picture of Evan Cross's methods. His obsession had been methodical, tracking Emma's every movement, studying her routines, predicting her reactions. He had created a controlled world in which she existed solely for his fixation. Emma, meanwhile, began the slow process of healing. The physical marks would fade, but the psychological ones ran deeper. Therapy, support from friends, and the careful reconstruction of her daily life became her focus. Yet even as she regained her footing, she remained vigilant. She had survived by being alert, by leaving breadcrumbs, by outthinking a man obsessed with control. That awareness could never entirely fade. The community reacted with a mixture of shock, sympathy, and fear. People discussed the case on social media, in cafes, and around dinner tables. How could someone so ordinary, someone like Evan, harbor such darkness? And how had Emma managed to survive without anyone noticing her peril until the very end? Monroe reflected on the case late one evening, reviewing the evidence one last time. Every clue Emma had left, the torn fabric, the smartwatch pings, the marks on the walls, told a story of survival, intelligence, and courage. He thought about the meticulous planning Evan had employed and the narrow margin by which Emma had escaped his control. It had been a game of high-stakes mental chess where one misstep could have been fatal. And yet, even as the case closed, Monroe felt the lingering presence of uncertainty. Evan might be behind bars, but the methodology, the obsession, the careful orchestration of fear could inspire others. There was a shadow in the town, a reminder that danger often hides in plain sight, waiting for a misstep, a moment of vulnerability. Emma's return to normal life was gradual. She resumed work, reconnected with friends, and reclaimed spaces she had once taken for granted.
But her perspective had shifted. She was more cautious, more aware of the subtle signs of danger, more attuned to the unseen patterns of human behavior. Survival had taught her vigilance in a world where appearances could be deceiving. The final scene of the story returned to the warehouse, now cordoned off and empty. The marks on the walls remained as silent witnesses, a testament to the ordeal that had occurred within its crumbling interior. Monroe stood for a moment, gazing at the structure, knowing that the immediate threat had been neutralized. The psychological traces of obsession and fear lingered, invisible yet potent. And in the quiet aftermath, a single message arrived on Emma's recovered phone. It was anonymous, typed, devoid of punctuation. "This isn't over." A chill ran down her spine. She looked up at Monroe, who gave a faint, reassuring nod. They had survived, but the world had proven that darkness could emerge anywhere, at any time, and sometimes it left a trail of clues for those sharp enough and brave enough to follow. Emma Harper had survived, but the game, she knew, was never truly finished.